Hey again, boys. How you going?
Hey Leo. Hey Wes.
Hey, how you
Yeah.
guys going, huh?
Oh, great. Looking forward to the show today. Doing our little take on the covers of Beatles songs, the best covers according to us. How did you go with the project, guys?
Oh man, what a deep well. A deep, deep,
Yes.
deep. We could be weeks on this. We won't, but we could.
I'll totally agree with you. There's just so much here that we could mine, and depending on one's taste and also of what we've had the opportunity to listen to over many years, we could go in directions, we could go in genres. There's just so much going on here that we could pick. But we'll just go for the top fives, eh?
Yeah, we'll start our top five. And before we get to our number one, instead of doing our usual what you would call the also rans.
Honorable
Um,
mentions, yeah.
Runners up.
honorable mentions, yeah, runners up, yep. We'll do our little, we'll specify our own little take on these Beatles covers and have a look
Yeah,
maybe at one particular aspect each, which will be
sure.
very interesting.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so number five, let's start with Martin as we normally do.
Okay, showing my proggish roots, a guitarist who probably rose to I won't call it fame, a modicum of fame, with the kind of hippie psychedelic group Gong. His name is Steve Hillage, and in the late 70s, he had some albums that were relatively successful in the UK charts. L being one of them, Fish Rising was another one, and he had a live album called Live Herald, and it had three sides that were live and one side in the studio, and he covered the George Harrison composition "It's All Too Much," which, if memory serves me correctly, is from the Yellow Submarine soundtrack. Um, so Steve, big on the wild and woolly guitar solos, and but this one just got that rambunctious energy that I got the feeling from the Beatles version that they didn't spend a lot of time finessing poor old George's new composition. So it was great that Steve Hillage in 1979 was able to bring some attention back to that. It's all too much, Steve Hillage.
Fantastic. What about you, Wes? Your number five?
While my guitar gently weeps. Well,
Okay.
we all know that that was one of the greatest guitar classics of all time.
Yeah,
When George Harrison wrote the song for the White Album, the rest of the Beatles, however, were apparently unconvinced by the song. Today it's regarded as a classic thanks to Eric Clapton's guitar work. However, I've found a version that's, in my opinion, totally sublime and possibly surpassing the Beatles' performance. I know you want to knock me down for saying
big
something like
call.
that, but that's okay. This one combines the talents of Carlos Santana on guitar, Yo-Yo Ma on cello, and India Ari on vocals. It's from Santana's album Guitar Heaven. Now, when Santana plays, to tell the truth, I melt. On this track, sometimes his guitar cries, sometimes it growls, and other times it's just beautifully sweet. Yo-Yo Ma may be a surprise guest, but this performance from him is stunning. And
Mm.
the woman's voice is as sweet as honey, I tell you. This is hard to come by when I say it's an awesome remake, and I'm only talking about my number five song.
I'll have to dig that one out. Wow.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's two versions of that. There's a radio version and there's a single version, maybe a third version, which is online on YouTube, which is not as good as the actual recording. So maybe check it out on Spotify.
Sure.
Awesome.
Great.
Fantastic, Wes. Mine is a bit more common, I guess you might say, my number five. Um, of course, we stay in our home country, Australia, and one of the female artists that I had a bit of a crush on when I was about 13 or 14. Of course, it's Colleen Hewitt and her version of the Beatles song "Carry That Weight." Just a song that a version of that song that had a lasting impression on me. She does a great job. She's got a fantastic vocal, and the way she delivers is magnificent. And yeah, it stayed with me. Colleen Hewitt at number 5 with "Carry That Weight."
Good.
Awesome. All right, let's go to number 4. Martin, back to you.
All righty. Somebody who kind of rose to prominence. He'd been in the Greenwich Village folky scene for a few years, had a few albums out. Probably rose to prominence via the Woodstock movie, Richie Havens. Really interesting guitar technique. He tunes his guitar to an open chord, and then he'll just put his finger on, and he can change the chords just with one finger. So his right hand is really doing all the work with the strumming. And his version of "Here Comes the Sun," one of the prettiest, most affirming, uplifting songs ever written in my book, in its original form. He just brings a drive and a propulsion. He loses some of the detail and some of the finesse, but just the energy and the propulsion that he brings, so earthy. And I really love that. Richie Havens, "Here Comes the Sun" from 1971.
Cool. Where's your number 4?
You Can Work It Out was released as a double A-sided single in 1965 from the Beatles, along with Day Tripper. Deep Purple reworked it in 1968, but a soul version from Stevie Wonder is my number 4. It was released as a single in 1971. Cashbox described it as a spectacular dance track. I'm not sure about that, but it was certainly good. Stevie got a Grammy nomination for his efforts and performed the song for McCartney when Paul was presented with the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 1990. I would have been packing it. But the Beatles version went to number 1 here, while Stevie's version, now hear me out here, did best outside Sydney and Melbourne. Classic Stevie Wonder, but I thought this song did a whole lot better than it did. I love it.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. Doing a bit of research, Stevie Wonder's version of "We Can Work It Out" is kind of topping a lot of people's favorite Beatles covers. I found that very interesting.
Yeah.
For me, number 4 is an artist that I really enjoyed. Of course, 1971 is my wheelhouse, so it's not surprising to find that Bill Withers comes into play as my number 4 Beatles cover of all time. His song "Ain't No Sunshine" came off an album called "Just As I Am," and from that album, Bill Withers did a great version of a Beatles song called "Let It Be," and and this version I think is stands up to the Beatles original. The way he does it is he out gospelizes Paul McCartney.
Is that possible? Wow.
It is. Have a listen to it. It's just magnificent. This album, "Just As I Am," is a ripper, and his version of "Let It Be" comes into play with, of course, Booker T. Jones on Hammond organ, and hand claps come in, and I don't know, but hand claps, I'm a sucker for hand claps in a particular song, especially a gospel song. So, yeah, that's my number 4. Bill Withers doing a great take on "Let It Be." Martin, how about your number 3?
All righty. I don't know about you guys, but when I was a teenager, you go to the department stores and they would be like, the compilation records like 20 explosive hits and Ripper and, all those kind of things, 20 Golden Greats. But there would be kind of knockoff records that were like no-name artists. Like it would never list the artists. It would just be like the top 10 songs of last month or whatever. There's a gentleman whose name was Ross McManus in England, who was the lead singer of the Joe Loss Orchestra. So the Joe Loss big band of some notoriety. And he used to moonlight as a session vocalist on some of these records, but he could never let the boss, Joe Loss, know what he was doing. So he would do it under an assumed name. So he took the maiden name. I don't know if it was his wife or his aunt or grandmother. Took the name Costello as his name for the recordings. And he made one of these recordings, and the producer was like, hang on a minute, we've got something special here. I'm not going to stick this on some bargain bin $2.99 record that's just for the department stores. Well, so he arranged for it to be released as a single. And so Mr. Costello, who is actually Elvis Costello's father, and recording under the name Dave Costello, he put out The Long and Winding Road. This was actually a huge hit in Australia in 1970 because there was a radio ban, and Wes will know more about this radio ban, meaning because radio stations didn't want to pay royalties to the record companies, the record companies were like, well, you can't play our songs. Some record labels were like, hey, you can play our songs, don't pay us any royalties. Dave Costello had a huge hit with this Beatles song, The Long and Winding Road. Elvis Costello's dad, real name Ross McManus. Beautiful, just a stunning version. Dave Costello, The Long and Winding Road.
It's certainly true that at the time of The Long and Winding Road, the Beatles released that here, and there was, apart from the ABC, no airplay for the Beatles version. What kind of happened is that all the American product was allowed to be played at the time on air at no cost without any royalty. But Australian artists that were with major record companies and British artists had to pay royalties if you were playing them on the radio. And there was a big jack, from the commercial radio networks. They did the same sort of thing again in 1984 with different labels and basically said, well, we're banning you. We're not going to play any of your tracks. And that hit the Beatles tremendously. It hit so many other acts out of the UK and Australia. And that saw the rise of labels such as Fable, and which was Ron Tudor's company. Yep. And what happened there was that he secured the rights for the Dave Costello song, put it out, and of course that was the version everybody heard. What I find quite remarkable about it is that it has an orchestra on the track, and it's not the same orchestral arrangement that's on the Beatles stuff.
Yeah.
So whoever did this
knew what they were doing.
They knew what they were doing, and they were thinking that this song was going to go remarkably well. And like many of the Beatles stuff, there was no guarantee at the time that it was going to ever be released as the Beatles single. Well, it was in the UK and it was here, but it didn't get in the air. The Beatles version didn't get in the airplay until after the record ban. And sadly, apart from a few radio shows, Dave Costello's version
has been wiped from.
Yeah,
it's been wiped from history. Wiped from history. It's you can't get it. You can't find it. Nobody will tell you about it except for us.
Yeah,
and one or two other wonderful places.
Yeah, I've been trying to get Fable to re-release it. We'll see if they can.
Good on you.
Okay. Wes, what about your number 3 Beatles cover?
The Beatles tune Eleanor Rigby has charted several times in Australia. Now, the original version, I think it was backed with the Yellow Submarine, was a #1 hit in 1966. And the best known cover is Zoot's heavy rock version from December 1970, which reached #3 nationally.
Yeah.
But there's two others. In 1968, Ray Charles released his take on the song, and that went to #22 in Melbourne. But the cover version that speaks loudest to me is a classy version from the Queen of Soul, who personalizes the song and introduces herself as Eleanor Rigby herself. She sings, "I'm Eleanor Rigby. I pick up the rice in the church where the weddings have been." Her rendition brings Father Mackenzie to life, evoking real, genuine compassion for all the lonely people. The version I'm talking about is from Aretha Franklin. It reached #5 on the US R&B chart, 17 on the Billboard Hot 100, and 23 in Brisbane in January 1970. Her vocals shine as much as they did on Respect, Think, Seesaw, and I Say a Little Prayer. It's my #3 song.
Beautiful.
Yeah, great version. Great version. Well, my #3, back to Australia we go for me. The big fella, Doug Parkinson. Doug Parkinson with his great version of Dear Prudence. What can you say about that? It just, I think it's equal. It's equal to the Beatles version. And for me, that's good enough to put it in my top 5 Beatles covers of all time. He just does an amazing job with his amazing voice, and the instrumentation there complements him beautifully. My #3, Doug Parkinson with Dear Prudence. I love it. Brilliant song. Martin, how about your #2?
All righty, I've got a real left turn for this one. I'm going to need my glasses to read my notes. A European, Slovenian and Yugoslav outfit called Laibach in 1988 released an album called Let It Be, which was their tribute to the Beatles. Now, Laibach, called an avant-garde music group associated with these genres: industrial, martial, and neoclassical, whatever that means. Apparently, they're a big influence on Rammstein, who kind of hybridized extreme metal with electronica. So Laibach, they formed in 1980, representing the musical wing of an arts collective called, let me pronounce this properly, Neue Slovensische Kunst, a group, they helped found in the 80s. So really, really eccentric kind of group where it's like postmodern in a sense. It's like you can take their work as satirical if you want to, but there's a sense in which you have to ask yourself if it's sincere as well, or if it's something that's beyond sincerity and beyond. So, for example, they did a version of the Sound of Music soundtrack, and video clips you can find on YouTube of songs like The Lonely Goat Herd. And so there's a middle-aged gentleman with a beard and wearing the traditional garb of Swiss Alps, and the little hat and the dungarees, leather dungarees, and singing it in such a sweet voice. And then in comes another singer, the big kind of Cookie Monster metal vocals sort of thing. Really strange and unusual, but fascinating at the same time. Obviously there's a love and a reverence for the material, but there's also a sense in which there's something quite subversive going on, and you can't quite put your finger on what's. So they did a version of this absolutely gorgeous John Lennon composition, Across the Universe, and beautiful choral vocals. There's nothing abrasive about it at all. Absolutely enchanting and hypnotic. And if that's your gateway into a group like this, be prepared to be enthralled, enchanted, and somewhat traumatized. Some of the things you might come across from 1988, Laibach, and Across the Universe. That's number 2 for me.
Oh, amazing. One to check out for sure.
Check that one out, but go and have a look at their Sound of Music stuff as well. It's absolutely hair-raising and amazing.
Cool.
Let alone their own composition over the years. So.
Yep. What about you, Wes? Number 2?
Yeah, this is a double up for you.
Ooh.
And it's a personal favourite of mine, and it's a cover of the Beatles tune that was recorded for the White Album. I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
In the 60s, most music was released in a staggered fashion from country to country. Take, for example, the Beatles' self-titled album, often called the White Album. It was released in the UK on November 22, 1968. 3 days later, it was released in the US, while Australia had to wait 2 weeks for it to be released on December 4. Lucky they got it in time for Christmas. A friend of the Australian singer Doug Parkinson brought the English version of the album back to Australia with him on a plane and played it to Parkinson, who loved it so much that he started performing it ahead of the local release of the album. Fans loved it, possibly because it was about Mia Farrow's sister, Prudence. Parkinson recorded it and released the single in early 1969, so within 6 weeks of the UK release. The song Dear Prudence peaked at number 5 on the Go Set national chart, and that year, Parkinson won Hoadley's Battle of the Sound in the national final. It's an amazing soulful version. It led to him leaving Festival Records and going over to Columbia, or the EMI Columbia label, and great change. And that led to him doing other things like Hair, Without You. It just took his career to another level. And it all started with this song, Dear Prudence.
Very good.
Excellent. My number 2, first time I heard this was on the radio. I never heard of the band, but I knew the song from the Beatles called I'm the Walrus. And the band I want to talk about is a band called Spooky Tooth.
Oh, yes.
And I heard this song on an album show, I think it was in the early 70s. And my ears pricked up and I thought, this is fantastic. This is as good or better than the Beatles version. The delivery was full on. The heaviness of the song was full on. And it did a lot more than pique my interest because I wanted to hear more of that. And that song stands up, that version stands up today, and it's Spooky Tooth with I Am the Walrus. Have you guys had the pleasure of hearing that?
A long time ago.
Yeah.
I have always, I've always intended to dig into Spooky Tooth, Savoy Brown, some of those bands. Spooky Tooth, I believe Mick Jones, the guitarist, went on to form Foreigner.
Yes, that's right. Yep.
Yeah. So, and of course, Dreamweaver, Gary Wright was from Spooky Tooth as well.
Yep.
So, so a band that had a legacy, a lasting legacy, but I've never really dug into them. So this is maybe a giddy up for me.
Okay, well, before we go to our number ones, as promised earlier,
Sure.
we might delve into an aspect of the Beatles covers that, how would I put it, a specialized look at the Beatles covers. Martin, what aspect have you looked at?
So for me, I'm going to need my glasses again because I've got copious notes here. I was looking at Beatles covers that were core part of movie soundtracks. And so there were three movies in particular that I want to kind of point out. One, of course, being the quite notorious Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, featuring the Bee Gees and Peter Frampton. And before I tell you who was on it, let me quote Robin Gibb from the Bee Gees. Bear in mind, this came out in 1978, so that's 11 years after the original Sergeant Pepper's. 11 years, right? So Robin Gibb says, kids today don't know the Beatles version of Sergeant Pepper. And when those who do see our film and hear us doing it, that will be the version they relate to and remember. Unfortunately, the Beatles will be secondary. You see, there's no such thing as the Beatles. They don't exist as a band and never performed Sergeant Pepper live in any case. When ours comes out, it will be in effect as if theirs never existed. Let's take a minute's silence to remember the unfortunate passing of any sense in those comments. My goodness. Hyped. They spent all of their enormous earnings from Saturday Night Fever putting this movie together, and it flopped. Lost them a whole load of money. But it had some interesting songs on it. Peter Frampton did The Long and Winding Road. Barry Gibb did A Day in the Life. Billy Preston did Get Back. Aerosmith, Come Together. Robin Gibb's version of Oh Darling was released as a single. Beautiful version, actually. My sister actually owned this double album vinyl soundtrack, and I swear it had Jeff Beck, guitarist, doing an instrumental version of I Want You, She's So Heavy. I remember listening to the whole thing, and that was the only song that I liked. But if you go online, not on Spotify, if you look at Discogs, if you look at the official, if you look at Wikipedia, where is it? No mention of it. And in 2007, there was a film called Across the Universe that was using Beatles songs. So Julie Taymor was the creative director of this film. She went on to do the Spider-Man musical that U2 wrote the soundtrack for on Broadway. Very troubled production that was, but this film was quite watchable. I think Ewan McGregor was in it, amongst others. Bono did appear in the film, and some beautiful renditions of Beatles songs by Joe Cocker, Come Together. Bono and the Edge did Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and people who I've never heard of before or since. TV Carpio did I Want to Hold Your Hand. Lovely, plaintive, achingly lonely version. Carol Woods and Timothy Mitchum did Let It Be, and the actress Evan Rachel Wood did Blackbird. Lovely version. Very creditable versions. And finally, of the movie soundtracks, another notorious one, using footage from the Second World War, black and white, with new versions of Beatles songs. All this and World War II. And good luck finding the soundtrack anywhere. Good luck finding a version of the film anywhere. Apparently once every several years, they'll hold one-off screenings in secret locations for 100 people, and maybe that's to prevent lawsuits or to keep copyrights or some legal obligation, but just never been re-released. But it had some corkers on it. Elton John's single Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, with John Lennon playing guitar, and it was a big hit in Australia. Also, Brian Ferry did She's Leaving Home. Rod Stewart had a hit single in Australia with Get Back from this same album. Leo Sayers' very plaintive version of Let It Be was kind of a prototype of what John Farnham and Tina Turner did with Help. Bee Gees did She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, Four Seasons, Helen Reddy, Status Quo, Peter Gabriel, Tina Turner, and, as the saying goes, many, many more. Intriguing, valiant attempt, terrible movie apparently, but maybe worth digging at if you know where the bodies are buried. All this and World War II.
Wow. That's good.
That's soundtrack, songs from movie soundtracks.
Well, I sold both of those soundtracks to one of our mutual mates in North Geelong.
Nice.
But well, I was pleased to get rid of them.
I still have some of those Across the Universe songs though. TV Carpio, no idea what she's up to, but interesting version, really nice.
Cool. Okay, Wes, what's your slant on this Beatles covers thing?
But I thought we'd look at the Aussies, eh? And look, there's so many things that we could cover, like you've already mentioned, Colin Hewitt and Carry That Weight and Golden Slumbers. But I've kind of like got an unusual group of 5 songs, some of which are going to be well-known hits. But my first is something which may not be remembered at all. It's probably in the same ilk as the movie soundtracks, but this was a production for the ABC, and it was one of the early colour productions that the ABC put together, and I suspect it was with the Australian Ballet. The piece was called The Fool on a Hill, and the recording of this was put together by the Sydney Symphony Orchestra with Jack or John Lanchbury, who was the conductor. And it was a full production of Beatle tunes, all arranged in symphonic approach. Just one of these is available online today. It's the Yesterday Concerto, and features an Australian pianist by the name of Isidore Goodman, and that's worth a shot. So you need to put in Yesterday Concerto and Isidore Goodman if you're going for a search for this. And it's really just stunningly beautiful and excellent arrangements. And I love it immensely. And I've got to say that I only rediscovered that in the past 2 or 3 weeks as we were looking to research this. The fourth one for the Aussies is someone who very dear to me and who lived next door to me for some time, and that was Renee Geyer. Renee, on her It's a Man's World album, which was the James Brown cover, did this really sentimental, beautiful version of And I Love Him. She changed it, or maybe she just left it as And I Love Her. And that is just, I haven't heard Renee sing so sensitively throughout her career. There's a few things that come close, but this just is, wonderful for me. From there, we look at Sherbet and Nowhere Man, Zoot, Eleanor Rigby, and my number one Aussie tune, which is not in my top 5, is the John Farnham version of Help. Classic. When he recorded that, it was like at the end of the Sadie career. In 1980, he was doing these covers, and this was just outstanding and changed everybody's opinion of him and took him to Little River Bandland and then solo work in the USA, where a career almost made it happen until he, well, it's like when you get Quincy Jones ringing on your doorbell and saying, would you come and sing a song? Well, it almost happens. And unfortunately, the film that he sang, the song in was absolutely just dived. Should have been a hit. And so he comes back to Australia and wondering what to do. And thank goodness for his manager having the sense to fund the Whispering Jack album. But Help, this was a game changer for him, and that's a Beatle cover. And man, the way that it just starts with the piano is amazing.
I think, as you allude to, without Help, maybe we wouldn't have been ready to hear him do Whispering Jack.
I think
Help tuned everybody's ears So he wasn't Johnny anymore. Now he was John. Now he was credible. Now we believed he could do something real. It was just where was it? Where I'm not saying where was the new song, where was the right song? And so of course when as we know what happened, it still took a little while,
Yeah.
but we we were ready for the right moment because that got us ready for it. So absolutely.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, I've got a strange take on these Beatles covers. I've decided that I'm obsessed with Beatlemania. When the Beatles performed on the Ed Sullivan Show, it changed everything for many people, many Americans,
Oh, yeah.
and a lot of American artists. And I do believe a lot of them were shut out for a period because there were so many British artists that were dominating the charts through that period of time between, say, 64 and 66. But the old rockers, Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard, um, and all the bobbies. Do you remember all the bobbies that were around in the late 50s, early 60s?
Bobby
Bobby
Gillan,
Vinton.
Bobby
Yes.
Vinton, Bobby Goldsborough,
Rydell.
Bobby Rydell, and one I'm going to focus on today um, is Bobby V. Remember Bobby V? And I
Red,
just
yellow,
thought, as an
gold.
example of somebody who was a teen heartthrob in the from about 1960 to say 62, 63. But soon as the Beatles hit, you didn't hear much of Bobby V between 64 and 66. He tried, he had top 100 hits, but he couldn't crack that top 5 or top 10 like he used to in the early days. So I want to focus on 64 and what some of these artists did. Bobby V had an album called The New Sound from England.
Okay.
to try and get some traction of what the Beatles were doing at that time. And he recorded She Loves You on that album, and also From Me to You. Unfortunately, the album didn't do anything. It flopped. Its peak position was 146 on the Billboard LP charts. The good thing about it is he did write a number of songs in the vein of the British invasion. And the single that was released off that was called I'll Make You Mine, which he wrote. And if you have a listen to that, it's got a very, very British sound to it that would have fitted in beautifully in the charts at that time. But once again, people were having none of that. And unfortunately, Bobby V was forced out of business, basically, as a result of the British invasion. And he was an example of what can happen to a person who's seen the heights and tried to continue on in the same vein, but wasn't able to.
And the tides changed just like that.
Like a tsunami, the British invasion hit and hit hard, and he was one of the people that were victims, I guess you might say, of that. Artist number 2, Pat Boone. He had massive hits in the mid to late 50s into the early 60s. And after that, he tried very hard. In fact, he had an album in 1963 called Timey Kangaroo Down Sport, which did, which I haven't heard. I should have done it as a research project, but I was too enamored with his 1964 album called Boss Beat. Now, Boss Beat has a number of contemporary covers on it, including his version of I Want to Hold Your Hand. Not bad. Not bad at all. have a listen to "I Want to Hold Your Hand" from Pat Boone. He's trying hard to mix it with the big guys that are coming
So
through.
he gets a participation award. Is that what you're saying?
I agree, yes. Boss Beat is not I wouldn't say it's a bad album, but he was consigned to the not even making it on the chart with this album.
Yeah.
At least these guys had a crack. These Americans that knew that the Beatles had something, you've got to hand it to them. But unfortunately, they couldn't match it with the originals. My third, the third artist and my third and final artist I want to talk about actually succeeded, and that was the Supremes. They hit the scene in 1964 with their first major hit, and it went to #1. It was called Where Did Our Love Go? Followed by Baby Love, followed by Come See About Me. These were all in 1964. And then they released an album in October 64 called A Bit of Liverpool, which included A Hard Day's Night, You Can't Do That, Can't Buy Me Love, and I Want to Hold Your Hand. 4 Beatles covers on that album.
Wow.
I had a good listen to it. It sounded rushed, #1. The versions were, I don't like to use that word, but I'm using the word insipid. I didn't like it at all.
Wow.
And it was just like, let's release an album because of this thing that's happening now. We'll do our own versions. You couldn't even hear the instrumentation. You know how Motown is renowned for its great backing instrumentation. You could hardly hear it. So to me, it's something that was done on the run, and it did get to #21 on the album charts. This was such a threat to American artists and such a great thing, great sound that was permeating at the time, that artists like Pat Boone and Bobby V and the Supremes had to release their own English albums.
Trying to surf on the incoming wave with varying degrees of success.
Yeah, exactly. And of course the Supremes went on to do amazing things subsequent to that, of course. So that they didn't let that little hiccup actually hold them back. In fact, they went from strength to strength. But one of my favorite Supremes albums, I've just ordered a reissue of their 1966 album called I Hear a Symphony, which has that particular hit on it. But it's the arrangements and the production of that album compared to A Little Bit of Liverpool is like day and night. The arrangements on this album are stunning.
Yeah.
Are stunning. And you get a physical version of this particular album, and you're going to just absolutely love it. And they do a great version of Yesterday on I Hear a Symphony. Brilliant version of it with strings and all sorts of great lush treatments of that particular song. So there's my little synopsis of what was going on in 64 as a result of Beatlemania and
casualties were trying to keep up.
Yeah, there were a lot of casualties. A few of them got through. In fact, it wasn't until after the Beatlemania had settled down that some of these artists came back into the charts. Bobby Goldsboro, the Bobby started coming back. Bobby Vinton had hits again. So it was as a result, I believe, of the waning of the Beatlemania and the British invasion, that some of these older American artists came back into play chart-wise. I found that very interesting.
One of the artists who was able to keep going was Del Shannon. And surprisingly, in 1963, he became the first American artist to have a cover of a Beatles song. And that was For Me to You. And maybe that's the reason why he was able to continue to have hit records through to the late 60s in the US, because he got onto there quick. The song For Me to You was a hit number 77. Now, that's not a bad number, 77 in the USA, because their chart goes down to 200. All right, so much bigger population than here. Whereas that
So you could have two sandwiches for lunch that week.
That's right, you could.
For one.
Yeah, so his version hit 21 in Australia, along with the Beatles.
Okay.
In 1963.
Okay, so let's get into our number ones, Beatles covers of all time. Martin, start with you.
Okay. If you ask pretty much any rock guitar player who their favourite guitar player is, they're likely to say possibly Eddie Van Halen. But if you just say, no, but who's the best? Who is the best? Jeff Beck. Jeff Beck is a virtuoso who he could overplay. He doesn't overplay. Or does he? He's just when Eric Clapton says Jeff Beck plays notes that aren't in everybody else's guitars. He just speaks to something deep in your chest, just something amazing. Jeff Beck had worked with George Martin, well-known Beatles producer, on his album Blow by Blow, which had a cover of She's a Woman on it. Quite nice. And Jeff Beck, as I said, on my sister's vinyl double album set of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Bee Gees and Peter Frampton, soundtrack to the movie, had I Want You Shoot So Heavy on it. But my all-time number one Beatles cover is from an album that was released in 2005 called In My Life, a tribute to George Martin, and it's Jeff Beck's version of A Day in the Life, in which he plays the vocal melodies and then he plays all the orchestral parts and he builds to the crescendo and just that incredible release and come down at the end.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That album is superb. It's got some rather unusual tracks on that. And it's got, if I've got the right album, Sean Connery's Speaking in My Life.
Yes. And
some other things as well. Possibly Robin Williams and Bobby McFerrin doing Come Together. Tremendous stuff.
Yeah. Jeff Beck, A Day in the Life, from a tribute to George Martin. My number one.
Where's your number one?
Now, there's more than 50 cover versions of this song, with a little help from my friends. Some of the cover versions include Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, Tori Amos, Count Basie, the Beach Boys, the Bee Gees, Bon Jovi, Cheap Trick, and Joe Cocker. But I'm going to stop right there, even at the letter C, because Joe's version, to my mind, is the definitive version of the song. It's slow, soulful. It's a radical reinterpretation of Ringo's classic from Sgt. Pepper. The powerful and potent rendition featured B.J. Wilson from Procol Harum on drums, Jimmy Page, later of Led Zeppelin, on guitar. Tommy Eyre was the organist. And Tommy had worked with everybody from B.B. King to Tracy Chapman, Jerry Rafferty, and of course Wham. Cocker's single hit number 8 in Australia in 1968. But it wasn't the only Beatle cover he recorded. In 1964, his first single was a cover of I'll Cry Instead. Later it was She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, Something, Come Together, and Let It Be. In my book, and it's only in my book, which is yet to be written, by the way, no Beatle cover eclipses the amazing 45 with a little help from my friends from Joe Cocker.
All right, well, mine's no surprise, my number one. This was number one when we did our favourite covers of all time, let alone Beatles covers. Yep, Wes alluded to it earlier when he did his little Aussie take. Of course, released December 1970, got to number 3 on the Australian charts. A proto-metal version of Eleanor Rigby, brilliantly arranged, brilliantly sung, brilliantly played. What can I say? It has to be Eleanor Rigby by the Zoot.
Yeah, very good.
Can't be topped, in my opinion. And because it's so different to the Beatles version, you can't really say it's better than the Beatles version, but you can say as a rock version, it's far and above better than a lot of the other versions that have come out, in my opinion. So that's my number one. It's been an interesting journey through Beatles covers today, boys. Probably
we barely scratched the surface, really.
Thanks for all the hard work you've put in to do this show, and we'll catch up again soon.
You're on.
Cheers, mate.
Bye. Most enjoyable.
See you guys.